The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. Happy Friday, everybody. It is the Friday edition of the Nerdcast News Report for Friday, February 28, 2025, the last day of the month of February. We are ready to move on to the month of March, but before we do that, we're going to get you caught up on all the news from the end of this week so you can go into the weekend all ready to go. And we have a few worthy news items today as we had Pokemon Day yesterday, which we will certainly be spending a little bit of time talking about today. Of course, we've got a WWE Premium Live event coming up tomorrow with the Elimination Chamber, and that could be interesting to say the least. And a few other news items as well to wrap up your week as we head into the weekend. Joining me in the studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, Pokemon Day came and went. I believe there are still some events going on within all of their different interactive properties that you can go and enjoy. It's wild watching the Pokemon Presents from Pokemon Day. It's just, no matter if there are a lot of announcements that interest you or not, you can't help but kind of be floored by just how many properties they have and how many projects they have ongoing. It's a machine, man. It's wild, and that and so many other things to talk about today. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot going on, especially as it surrounds Pokemon Day and Nintendo and everything that's going on. It's going to be a busy few months for that entire company, and this was kind of felt like the kickoff to what is going to be a big 6 weeks ahead as we kind of count down the days and hours until the big direct at the beginning of April. But let's jump right into the fallout from Pokemon Day. Of course, as always, February 27th, Pokemon Day, they had another Pokemon Presents event, and I know you had the chance to watch it, and we've got a press release that we'll show you and a couple of other articles that were written about it. First off, as I think I said the other day, kudos to Nintendo for making all of their assets available to download. It makes doing thumbnails for these things very easy, but also as you watch different content creators, you wonder why the same images show up in all of them. That's the reason why, because Nintendo does make it really easy just to download images and use for your media. So kudos to them. Everybody should do that. That makes life a lot easier. But yeah, a couple of big things, kind of linchpin the event. I think there's a few smaller announcements as well that are going to get people excited. As you look across the entire event, what do you most take away? What are the things maybe you're most excited about, or you think other people will be most excited about out of Pokemon Day?
Yeah, there were really two announcements that I think will probably have the most traction. A lot of people going into this were excited to see where we are with Legends ZA, like, when's that going to be coming around, and maybe seeing some gameplay, because what they showed us initially a year ago now wasn't a whole lot. You were still kind of speculating, when does this game take place? Where am I going? What am I doing? As a follow-up to Legends Arceus, which was really well received, what are they going to do to kind of tweak the gameplay and give you a new experience? And we found out it's going to be releasing late 2025. The game seems to be set in a not-so-distant future in Lumiose City, one of the main hubs from Pokemon X and Y. The concept is basically the city's undergoing this redevelopment plan to allow humans and Pokemon to coexist in the city together. It's going to feature numerous wild zones, at least 8 of them, where within the city there's going to be areas with increased depth of Pokemon. You can traverse on top of buildings, which is kind of wild. They did show the starters, which include 2 from Generation 2, Chikorita and Totodile, and then 1 from the Black and White generation, Tepig, the Fire Pig. What kind of caught my attention was that it has more of a action RPG style gameplay to it, where you're running around freely on the field with the Pokemon around you. Kind of like Legends Arceus, it looks like the Pokemon can actually notice you and attack you personally. But unlike Arceus, when you actually got into the battles, with this game, it looks like you're actually maneuvering your Pokemon, and when you're using techniques, they take time to cast. There's ranges that they can hit. It truly does feel like that next step forward as far as action RPG play. Kind of weird, and I one thing I've noticed in Legends Arceus was similar in this way is like I feel like they take one step forward in introducing a new element of gameplay, but it's kind of at the expense of something else, and it does at this point kind of seem like you're confined just to the city. So not that it isn't a huge city, but I'm curious to see how they're going to pull off not making the game just feel really confined and maybe less diverse in its areas and geography. But it's Pokemon. I'm sure they'll find a way to still make it fun.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit last night. Is you do wonder if this is just kind of a way to limit potential frame rate issues, especially on the Switch, and whether they're just kind of laying the groundwork for whatever they're going to be able to do when the Switch 2 comes out, as far as maybe expanding the world at that point and not having to worry about the hardware not really being able to keep up with that additional gameplay.
Exactly. And one thing we've seen from Nintendo in all their first-party stuff is they have the luxury to basically slow play any kind of graphical enhancements or gameplay evolution because whatever they release is still going to sell. People might complain that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet feels antiquated compared to a PAL World, but they still went out and bought it in crazy numbers. Kind of moving on to the other big thing that I found interesting is they announced Pokemon Champions, which is going to be kind of a Pokemon Stadium style game that's going to work on both the Switch and mobile devices with cross-platform play, as far as I can tell. You also have access to Pokemon Home through it, so you can transfer Pokemon over from some of your other past games to battle in this stadium type game. I think, but at the end of the day, for a lot of people, Pokemon is about the competitive battling, and I think the fact that you can play on the Switch and on your Android or iOS device, that's really a cool thing, and it shows that even if Nintendo has no interest in playing with Sony or Microsoft, they realize, and they have realized through their other mobile apps, that that's still a market that they want to capitalize on, because mobile games and casual mobile games, there's just such a huge pie there to dig into, and they haven't been shy about doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's smart. This feels like kind of, I don't want to say a successor to Pokemon Go, but certainly another type of game where you're going to be able to move around and battle people and be able to take it on the go with you, which I think is something they realized that Pokemon Go has been really wildly successful. Obviously, maybe not to the degree as far as people playing it that they did when it first came out, those first 6 months to a year, but they're continuing to push it. We've mentioned on the podcast that they're doing these events where they're having people with baseball games be able to do these big Pokemon Go events. They're still doing big drops and things like that. This feels like kind of another step in that progression where now you're going to be able to battle people as you go around, whether it's like you said on your Switch or even on your phone.
Yeah, and I think it addresses one of the big flaws of Pokemon Go, and that's, as fun as it is to go around and catch Pokemon and do everything you can in Pokemon Go, the battling just feels cheap in a way. Like, clearly they weren't going to be able at the time in 2016 to give you full on like 6 versus 6, identical to the handheld mainline games battling. It just wasn't going to happen. And I think, to me, Go has always kind of felt like a step down as far as that part of the game. And now you're going to have a mobile game that'll allow you to battle kind of as nature intended, I suppose. And I think that's going to get people excited.
Yeah, and I think people are excited about that as well as some of the other announcements. I know there were some trading card game announcements as well, which I know people are super excited about that. Talking about mega evolutions in some of the games and the trading cards, I guess. Like, there's a lot of kind of ancillary news that, depending on what you're really into, and I think that's the best part of this event, is that if you're into the games, you've got some great news there. If you're into the card game instead, sounds like you're doing pretty well there as well.
Yeah, that's the thing about it, is that, and going into watching the Pokemon Presents, you have to realize that 80% of it might not be anything that interests you.
Yeah.
And it's that 20% that you're like, okay, finally, they got to me. It's I'm never going to play Pokemon Cafe Remix. That's just not my thing. Or the Pokemon Masters mobile game. Or maybe not even Pokemon Unite. That doesn't really intrigue me. But, the trading card pocket game is kind of cool. Getting to open digital packs of cards is fun. Yeah, they did announce a new expansion for that as well. There's something for you, even if it's just the mainline stuff. You're always going to be left wishing there might have been one or two more announcements that catered more to your needs, but they're touching a lot of customer bases in these announcements, and it's just they're a machine.
And again, this is kind of the warm up, if you will. I'm sure Pokemon fans don't see it that way, but it is kind of what is going to lead into a big 6 weeks for the company, as you're going to have the announcement of, when we're going to see the Switch 2, what we're going to see with the Switch 2. I mean, there could even be more Pokemon IP, announced, or at least confirmed that maybe some of the stuff they talked about yesterday will also be for the Switch 2. We're going to find that out in about 6 weeks, or less than 6 weeks now. So if you're a Nintendo fan, and we both are, I think it's a really exciting time for the company, and I'm really interested to see kind of what happens as we get into the beginning of April. Some really cool stuff from Nintendo, and of course, you can go online and get the full details of Pokemon Day, especially if you're more interested maybe in the trading card side. Certainly some news there for you as well. Let's jump into some other news headlines before we wrap up the week. And this was one that I'm not shocked to see this news, but I'm shocked a little bit about the timing. The news came out yesterday from Twitch CEO Dan Clancy that they are going to be opening up monetization tools to most streamers from day one. As far as I know, we don't have it yet. It would be really cool, but not available yet. Will allow creators, regardless of their status, to grow their communities, start building, earning through direct patronage. It's interesting to me that you had this big announcement last week where they were going to restrict your storage for highlights and things like that. And people just, kind of had a fit. And I guess the only issue is the people who have that much, storage that they're going to have to delete are also the people that have been monetized and don't have to worry about this announcement. But for the casual streamers like us at this point, and a lot of other people, it's a chance to maybe start making some money off Twitch, which in theory encourages you to do it more, which maybe can help continue to grow your fan base and all that stuff. It's a little weird that they didn't just combine those into one press release and at least mitigate some of the backlash they got from that with a little bit of good news.
Yeah, they could have made this one announcement and really spun it in a way that is pro casual streamer, pro new streamer, and kind of in the face of the big kind of monolithic streamers that I think as a company, Twitch probably, certainly they enjoy getting the cut of those people's subscriptions and donations. But I think at the other hand on that is they don't like being beholden to these people.
Yeah.
So I think if you have one streamer that's monetized and has 1,000 subscribers, that's great. But there are thousands of streamers who aren't in a position to get any subscribers. And if they could get a handful each, you're mitigating the impact of one of those big name streamers deciding to leave, getting canceled, any number of things that could negatively impact your bottom line that are kind of out of your hands. You're now saying, let's instead try to empower the people with smaller audiences so they can contribute to our bottom line.
Yeah, it seems like a common sense decision. And the other thing, too, is, if you look at it even out of the scope, because obviously you've mentioned kind of the big picture situation, but let's look at it from a small picture situation. If you are thinking about getting started in streaming, there's more options now than ever before. You've got YouTube, you've got Kick, you've got who knows what else. There's probably more stuff out there we don't even know about that exists. And you look at the YouTube monetization stuff, and I would suspect, I could be wrong, but I would suspect that YouTube to some degree is going to follow suit. Maybe not everybody's monetized, but my guess is you'll see them kind of lower some of their monetization numbers to kind of compete. But, you're looking at those brands and kind of seeing, like, with YouTube, it's always been a trade-off. Like, you have more people there, a bigger audience, more people go to YouTube, therefore you have the option or the ability to draw a bigger fan base, but the downside is the monetization numbers are so high, it's hard to get in the door and monetize with them because it takes so much stuff to get there. Once you get there, you're golden. It's just going to take a while. With Kick, who really knows? It's kind of the Wild West of streaming, and it just, until they kind of get somebody in there to kind of clean up some of the nonsense that happens over there.
I feel like it's the platform that you most hear about when you hear about like the nuisance streamers in Japan and whatnot.
So that's not what you want your company known for. I mean, maybe at first any publicity is good publicity, but at some point, if you want to actually attract a major Twitch streamer who's frustrated with all this, you need to actually be a reputable company with reputable streamers. Otherwise, every time your name comes up, it's some dude, hopping in and out of subway cars without paying, or defacing property, or harassing locals in Japan. Like, that can't be the best way for your company to get the word out. So it's, I think it makes a ton of sense. I don't know why it took them this long to kind of come to this realization and what this is going to look like. Because, I mean, who knows what you would even make off of it. But I think it's, if you want more people using your platform, especially smaller people, this is the way to do it. Give them at least some chance, because let's be real, it's a little bit like playing the lottery. You entice people like, hey, you could win $1 billion. Like, you could go move to an island somewhere. In reality, you're just going to probably give the lottery commission a bunch of money, because that's how those things work. The house always wins. Same thing here. Like, you could be the next big streamer. More likely than not, you might make a handful of bucks here and there. But if you're streaming because you love to do it, that's probably fine for most people. But at least gives you the opportunity to potentially make a little bit of money while you get to do something like this.
Yeah, if nothing else, the stick's a little shorter and the carrot's a little closer.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that's enough incentive, even if they still never quite reach the carrot itself. It could be what this makes you decide to stream on Twitch versus a YouTube.
For sure. I think we will see that. And if you don't know, if you've never searched, because sometimes we do when there's really nothing else on, there are a ton of people out there streaming to nobody and one viewer and stuff like that. I mean, obviously our viewership, comes and goes, and we're grateful for everybody who does come by and check us out, whether live or on the VOD. But there's a lot of small streamers out there, I think, that could really benefit from this and potentially be able to put some money back into their stream that'll help make it bigger and better. So it'll be interesting to see. I will certainly report along when and if we get the option to activate that and what that actually looks like. We'll try to be kind of transparent about it as kind of a news reporting source. Let's jump to some wrestling news. Elimination Chamber coming up tomorrow at the Rogers Center. They're expecting over 30,000 in attendance from home the Toronto Blue Jays for really the last big step before we get to WrestleMania. Of course, we have 4 matches on this card, plus whatever this nonsense with The Rock is going to be. You see on the screen the 4 matches. You've got 2 really loaded Elimination Chamber matches. I think they have the potential to be really, really good. You've got a women's tag team match involving Trish Stratus in her hometown. And then what could just be a match that probably nobody on the card is going to want to follow, the unsanctioned match between Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. I guess let's start with the men's Elimination Chamber match, because it's at the top. You can make logical cases for really everybody in this match to win and main event WrestleMania. But if you're picking that based on your gut, what does your gut tell you that is going to end up happening in this match?
If I had to pick 1 or 2 top contenders without factoring in any potential storyline nonsense that could come into play in the match, you got to lean Cena or Punk. I think based on where those 2 guys are in their career and how they've kind of made it a point to tell you, hey, these guys really, Cena really needs that last title win. Punk really needs a main event Mania. You can't help but kind of think one of those 2. But I think the big question mark is, will the Cody decision happen before this? Will it impact the match, how it turns out? If Cody declines The Rock's offer to purchase his soul or whatever, will that mean somebody else will step up and say, I'll be your champion? Like, do we get a Drew McIntyre as a corporate champion for The Rock ultimately, or Punk, or Honestly, one name I think would be kind of wild to be Rollins, just given his history of being the dude who doesn't mind stabbing people in the back and just how opposed to the bloodline he's been up to this point. It's interesting. I wonder, like, who they initially planned to have win this match and if that's changed in the past 2 weeks.
That's a great question. And you know, I'm sure they'll claim that this was all planned out, but you know, I think it's pretty clear that The Rock dropping in and doing that was not something that was planned out, because why on earth would you not announce that on Raw that week when he decides he's going to swing by to SmackDown? So clearly it could very well change who's going to end up winning this match. And there are a lot of interesting ways you could go about it, especially if The Rock is going to be involved in the finish of this, setting up the match against Cody at WrestleMania. And we're assuming that The Rock isn't going to be available to wrestle at WrestleMania, because he might just insert himself in the match at the end and pin the winner and declare himself the winner and have him go on to WrestleMania. Who knows? Like, it's The Rock. He can pretty much do what he wants. We talked about the ratings of his segment on SmackDown. Who's going to argue with him at this point? You look at the Women's Elimination Chamber match. It's another really loaded match. To me, as I look at it, and then I'll get your thoughts, there's really one name that jumps out on that list as far as a contender for Rhea Ripley, and it's Bianca Belair.
Yeah.
That's the name that makes the most sense. It's not the only name that makes sense. You could go a lot of different directions with that. But I do wonder if maybe we're going to get some sort of reconciliation of the Jade Cargill storyline with this match in addition to that, to maybe set up a Belair heel turn, because it's either Belair or Naomi who attacked her. And honestly, at this point in Naomi's career, and she's been great, and I don't want to make this sound like she hasn't been, but it feels like a heel turn for Belair would do her more good than it would do Naomi at this point. So, you know, potentially coming down to those two, and then some video plays on the screen, which shows, you know, Belair was the one who did it, and then Belair pins her partner and wins the match, and, you know, that's kind of how it ends. But there's also the side of whoever ends up being involved with Cargill might also have to wrestle Cargill at WrestleMania. So there's lots of stuff there. But to me, as I look at those six, Belair is the name that jumps out. That's the match that is a marquee match, I think, that I'd want to see at WrestleMania.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I think obviously Belair Ripley has a lot of interest. They're both big powerhouses. It would be a fun match. Kind of looking at the field, you assume that the Ripley Morgan stuff is finished. Like, we're not going to have to go back and revisit that anymore. Bayley and Roxanne Perez, you assume they're going to be tied up together still to some degree. That leaves Naomi, Bliss, and Belair, and I don't see Alexa Bliss winning it. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense as far as building to a title match. Yeah, the Bianca Belair heel turn would also kind of make sense in her relationship with Montez Ford and the Street Profits, given their new attitude. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a heel turn as much as we just want to beat people up and win titles. Like, that's kind of their attitude, and I think that would fit in well for her character as well. Yeah, I don't know any other logical direction they would go besides Belair winning this.
Bliss winning feels like Jey Uso winning the Royal Rumble, in that you have somebody who's really popular, whose merch sells really well, and so you go ahead and push them and you put them in this match against Ripley. The only way I could see them doing that, and I don't think it'll happen, because I think you do that with maybe one major match at WrestleMania. You don't do that for two matches. But the only way I could see that happening is if you intend for Ripley to retain, and you're going to tie Belair and Naomi up in the Jade Cargill stuff for WrestleMania. I mean, I love Alexa Bliss. It would be really cool. But yeah, to me, it's Belair makes the most sense. Would I be shocked if Liv Morgan won it? No. Just because sometimes they have these feuds that never end. And Liv Morgan's been great. Like, no offense to her.
Being a tag champion now kind of leads me to think she won't win it also.
I hope you're right. But I feel like sometimes with the tag champions on this show, who knows? Like, the logical thing would say they're going to defend their tag titles at WrestleMania, but, you know, who knows how that's going to work out.
I just want to see something with the Cargill situation happen just to vindicate Liv Morgan and Raquel. I think they've been unjustly blamed for what happened with the saddest, most pathetic amount of evidence possible.
For sure. So that'll be an interesting match. And the tag team match, clearly on the card to get Trish Stratus a match at home, to get your champion on the card and Tiffany Stratton. I'm sure that'll be fine. It'll probably be the second match of the night right after what I would presume will be the women's Elimination Chamber that will open the event. Chance to kind of cool off before you have Zayn and Owens, and then the main event will be the men's Elimination Chamber match. The Zayn Owens match, I mean, those guys literally could do this forever. I have a feeling this is going to be hard to watch at times because these two just don't have any regard for human life. I feel like we could see a Randy Orton reappearance because it's unsanctioned, so there's no rules forbidding outside interference. I'm more curious about what comes out of this match than not that I'm not going to enjoy the match, because I will. I love both those guys, but I am more interested to see what the direction goes, because it feels like Orton and Owens is a pretty logical WrestleMania match, but I'm concerned about where that leaves Sami Zayn kind of floating in the wind as we head into WrestleMania season.
Yeah, it almost feels like you'd almost want to take one of the dudes out, like a Zayn, have him injured for a while or something, but you don't also want him to miss Mania. I'm excited for the match. I still think this is a future WrestleMania main event. I think I would love to see Sami Zayn win Money in the Bank or next year's Rumble, end up with the title, or have Owens end up with the title and Zayn chase him. I just think those two guys deserve, for everything they've been and done for the company for the past 10 years, they deserve to have a title match together at Mania as a main event.
Yeah, 100%. And hopefully that will happen at some point. They seem to both be under new contract. And
Zayn's owed a world title.
He is. For sure.
Let's be real.
That dude carried the company. He's one of a handful of people you can point at during the pandemic era who made the show watchable.
Yeah.
With his conspiracy theory stuff and everything.
Both their character work has been tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think, like I said, I have a feeling it's going to be rough to watch at times, but I think it'll be interesting as well. One last quick story, and this is just interesting because it's funny. When I originally saw this article, I thought it was just the top 10 pirated anime, and I understand now why I thought that, because 8 of the 10 shows on this list are anime. This is a list. The article originally came from Variety, but the data came from a company called Muso. It lists the top 10 pirated TV shows for 2024, and 8 of these shows are anime. That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, number 1. My Hero Academia, number 2. Mushoku Tensei, number 3. Then you've got your first non-animes, number 4, House of the Dragon, season 2. You got Dandadan, Tsukimichi Moonlight Fantasy, season 2. The Boys jumps in at number 7. Then Solo Leveling, Tower of God, and Blue Lock are your top 10. That is wild to me that 8 of the top 10 shows are now anime when it comes to these piracy lists and not mainstream television shows.
Yeah, and I still would love to know why that is, whether that's just a matter, kind of to your point before, that these shows are easier to get a hold of through illegal means, so people aren't streaming them illegally, or if they're just not that popular. And I think either one are equally likely to be the case. I think The Boys has always been a big hit. House of the Dragon's been good. But, man, there have been a lot of high-profile live-action shows that have fallen flat. And I think because of that, and we've seen that the surge in popularity of anime, but I think that's part of it, is that this is what people are looking for, and they're not getting it from any of the major studios over here in any kind of live-action capacity. Another thing I wonder about this, too, is how much of this is just based on how long these shows were around during 2024. You have Tensura, which aired through spring and summer, so that's a big window for people to pirate it.
Sure.
The only one that really kind of blows your mind is Solo Leveling, Blue Lock, which came out in fall and made the list. Same with Dandadan, which, not too shocking, Dandadan's been all over the place.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of the shows, they've been hanging out throughout the entirety of 2024, or a good chunk of it. So it's still amazing to me that of all these shows, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime still top the list.
Yeah, and the Variety article is really good. Got some good charts. Here's one up on the screen if you're watching us on Twitch or YouTube that shows the number of global visits based on different medium, and 117 billion visits for television, which includes anime. Publishing with manga, 79.3 billion, which is notable because publishing without manga is 23 billion. So 50 billion visits are just manga visits, which is just crazy. It's 55.8 to be exact. The other thing you notice is films are down, whether that's the quality of the films. I do think that the fact that most major motion pictures are available on a streaming platform within 2 or 3 weeks of them coming out now has probably reduced piracy to some degree, because it's like you don't have to wait to stream it. 6 months until it hits DVDs or Blu-rays. Like it is pretty much out. Sometimes at the same time, in fact, nowadays. But there's just some really interesting data. The visits to piracy sites are up there. You see the publishing piracy counts by country. U.S. leads the way, which you would expect, I think, to some degree. But there are the top 10, including Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, Russia, Taiwan, France, Thailand, India, and Mexico. So it's interesting to me, and I think, that's probably why we're getting these rankings of all the shows that, we saw a few weeks ago, the rankings of shows counting piracy numbers. And you can see why they're getting this data now, because clearly this is a problem in Japan, because anime is now the most pirated visual media, and not, obviously manga being on the publishing side, but this is something they're going to have to address and quickly, as much as you can, because again, you can't really stop it, but you got to figure out some way to combat it if you can, because it's clearly out of control.
Yeah, I was kind of critical of anime.com and Parrot Analytics list because it included all the pirated data, but clearly it's so substantial you can't really ignore it. And that's unfortunate, because I think it's a bigger problem than just anime. It's this idea that I should be able to see whatever I want, no matter how much money it costs to produce and how many people's livelihoods depend on it. I shouldn't have to pay for any of this. It's a mindset that for every 10 people that do that, maybe one of them is actually putting money back into the industry in some way, shape, or form. I think a lot of them will claim they do, but I'd like to see it, because I don't think that's the case.
I wonder what the overlap is if we had a Venn diagram of the people who pirate anime and the people who support AI artists. Because to me, they should have a very heavy overlap. Because if you're one of the people online who complain when people use AI, but then you're turning around and pirating anime, you're a hypocrite, because you're doing the same thing. You're taking money out of the pocket of, yes, you're hurting studios, and yes, studios need to treat their artists better. I mean, all that stuff is 100% true. That doesn't mean that pirating it somehow helps the animators out. Those guys are already making pennies, and now they're making less. And again, this is not to absolve the anime studios of guilt and blame.
No, not at all.
This is just to say that, you're not helping matters, and all you're doing is just making things even tighter for those people who need support, and that's pretty hypocritical.
And it's funny too. There's been a lot of discourse this season about a show like Sakamoto Days not looking good enough, and not comparing in its visuals to something like a Solo Leveling or Don, and it's like, when you see these shows that are also on the most pirated show list, it's like, that's why they don't want to spend Solo Leveling money on every show, because Solo Leveling is the 8th most pirated show out there. It's like they're not even making as much money on it as they should be. What's the incentive to take that risk on every property? It's insane.
I wish there was a way for these online forums where you had to put on your profile, like, yes, I pirated this show. Yes, I, buy AI art of this show. Like, I just want to see like how hypocritical you are when you go running to Anime News Network or wherever and rip a show's animation style, but they're like, well, I didn't pay to watch it. I pirated it. Like, come on, guys. Like, that's the reason this stuff happens. That's the reason stuff gets delayed. All this stuff is just because there's so much money being lost in the industry. And again, at some point, studios will decide it's just not worth it, and you're not going to get your favorite shows adapted anymore. And it feels like that day may be coming sooner rather than later, just because of just a lot of macroeconomic conditions that are far too long to get into on this news podcast. But just a fascinating article, honestly. Yeah. Really good stuff. Obviously not the piracy, but the information, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it as we get more information. Ready to wrap this up with the Empire Express.
Go.
A little VR gaming news today as Valve prepares to launch its long-rumored Deckard VR headset later this year, with the rumors that it may cost up to $1,200. Meanwhile, Sony has cut the price of its PSVR 2 to $399, a $150 price drop. What do you think the future of VR gaming is?
Man, that's a great question. I think it's always going to have its niche audience, but until we can get something that can compare to a Sword Art Online or Shangri-La Frontier, I feel like VR is still going to be incomplete as far as being the future of gaming. NXT in Cincinnati was a ratings winner on Tuesday as the show drew nearly 800,000 viewers. The top quarter hour featured WWE Hall of Famers The Hardys taking on the No Quarter Catch Crew. That quarter hour drew 867,000 viewers. Hardys are still a draw in 2025, aren't they?
Yeah, evidently so. And again, it's just another example of a talent that was working in AEW that drew big ratings that is no longer in AEW anymore. And then when you wonder why their ratings are tanking, no CM Punk, no Hardys, among others, like, it's pretty logical when you just do the math. Meanwhile, AEW Dynamite's overall viewership did increase, but they were unable to break the 600,000 mark as they came in at 598,000. This was up from 563,000 from last week, as that caused for celebration for Tony Khan.
I'm sure he and a certain segment of wrestling journalists and social media will derive some positive from all this, but any realist would have to be concerned why their A show has trended in the wrong direction for years now. At some point, you have to right the ship. WrestleVotes has leaked that Stephanie McMahon will be hosting a new WWE podcast. Details are still limited, but this will be her first official work with the company since leaving after her father Vince returned a couple years ago. Interested in listening?
Yeah, I think so. Stephanie's always been great, and I think she'll have a really good perspective, and I think, you know, she's involved in another series, like an ESPN Plus series this summer with going around and checking out wrestlers' houses. So I think she's a perfect person for the job, and should be a really interesting podcast. Finally, you may be finding more good deals on Steam in the future. Valve has announced that the daily deals on Steam will now increase from 4 to 6 games per day. In 2024, more than 2,800 games were featured in daily deals from more than 1,000 game developers. Sounds like a win-win for both developers and gamers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always in favor of more deals, and Steam at times has some really good ones. My only concern is that how many of these impulse buy great deals ultimately end up as untouched additions to most people's already depressingly large backlog of games?
Yeah, it's great to take advantage of deals, but if you're not going to play the game, then, you know, the best deal is probably not to buy it in the first place. But it is great to support these independent developers, especially in the face of maybe the bloat coming from the big companies. I think anytime you can support the little guy, it is a good thing. And that is going to wrap up this week's edition of the Nerdcast News Report. We are all finished for yet another week. Thank you to everyone for joining us. We appreciate having you along with us. Just a quick note, no watch along tomorrow for Elimination Chamber. We will be back on Sunday with the what has been Music Weekly. It is now going to be the Hard Rock Empire. We're going to be rebranding it, and we're going to continue on as we do. Just, no other changes to the show. We're going to be rolling on with the music of February the 14th coming up on Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We hope you will join us for that. It should be a lot of fun. Big thanks to Stoke Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. Big thanks to Rachel for joining us this morning. Big thanks to Mike, as always, here in the studio. And a big thanks to you for listening and watching and following along and sharing our posts on social media. Whatever you have done to help boost us up, we really do appreciate it. That's going to wrap things up. We'll be back with another edition of the Nerdcast News Report Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll talk about the fallout from Elimination Chamber and more coming up on Monday. Then, of course, the Hard Rock Empire coming up 7 o'clock Sunday night. That's going to wrap things up for the entire crew. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.